You are listening to the Dare to Love podcast with your hosts, Sonica Tinker and Christian Peterson, founders of LoveWorks. Welcome to the podcast, everybody. I am very excited to be with you today, and I am extra excited to have with me a very special guest, my good friend Jordan Fisher-Smith. Jordan Fisher-Smith is a Northern California writer and a LoveWorks workshops participant for over 5 years now. He's written for The New Yorker, Men's Journal, and Salon.com, and many others. His second book, Engineering Eden, won a California Book Award and has just been released in paperback. And I'll just add for myself that his first book, Nature Noir, was one of my favorite, still is one of my favorite reads, in case you ever want to read that. So Jordan, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time. I'm excited to talk to you.
It's a thrill to be here with you.
Thank you. First thing I want to ask you, Jordan, I've known you for a bit now. And I know that you've often said that before you came to LoveWorks, you were so skeptical about workshops and everything that, that smelled like personal growth, and you really didn't want to do that much.
Yeah, I mean, I had a strong aversion to the idea, and really, hadn't done workshops, and probably would have thought of myself as the least likely person to end up in one.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about what had you come to a workshop, and what has had you come back to our LoveWorks workshops? Well,
I think part of this, I have to explain a little bit what I just said, that, my parents were just endlessly in various kind of workshops. I grew up in Northern California, and sort of came of age in the 70s, and boy, my parents were just all over that stuff.
Yeah.
And I just, in the way that one reacts to one's parents, I just would have nothing to do with it. I thought it was a lot of, I don't know how else to say this, jerking herself off emotionally. and in my family at that time, it didn't work. And of course, there was a sort of catastrophic outcome while everybody was talking in secret language from workshops. And so I came into my adult life with an absolute aversion to the idea. And then, fairly late in life, I was in a relationship where I was, intimate relationship where I was really kind of suffering and kind of out of my depth. And it turned out that my girlfriend at the time went out to a charity auction and bought us a workshop, your introductory workshop, Give Yourself to Love. And that's how I ended up with you.
So maybe can you say a little bit about given that you're someone who stepped into that workshop with a good deal of skepticism and, I don't know, maybe not even expecting a whole lot, what happened there that had you think, maybe there's something here for me?
Well, LoveWorks for you is a toolkit. It's definitely not, it doesn't have the trappings of cultishness. I found you and Sonica don't hold yourselves above other people. You don't give yourself special powers. I think there's a very big component in personal growth of people setting themselves up as gurus or some kind of a teacher above the student. And I've really been impressed with your humility and the fact that you're just handing out a toolkit for personal relationships and success in life.
Yeah, I'm very pleased to hear that. We certainly strive for that to not be the case, to not put ourselves above or on a higher state. So
well, it's important because people sometimes give away power to religious leaders or to workshop leaders and teachers of various kinds, and I just really wasn't the kind to give away my power.
Yeah, I know that about you. Yeah. Well, what would you say you have found, in the relationship? You've been around the block a few times. So what have you found most challenging about relationships?
Well, I think what I found most challenging was that all of my life, whenever I encountered conflict or strife, whether in a personal relationship or in raising my children or in the workplace, I had what you call makeups, meaning that I immediately form narratives or stories about why the other person was doing what they were doing. And I also, I knew I had feelings. I think I had a way of describing feelings, but I didn't know the extent to which I was seeing every situation through my own stories. I think just like you teach, I assumed that I was seeing things clearly as a rational human being,
Yeah.
and that my perceptions were somehow a clear picture of the world outside me.
Yeah. And, another thing I'm curious about is, I know you've been a very self-reliant and resilient man. You're like an outdoors man. You've been in law enforcement. Like when you look at you from the outside, it's easy to make up that you're like a tough guy, an outdoors guy. I could take a picture of you, and if you don't, for those of you, I know you're just listening, you look like a Marlboro man. You just got those wonderful, sturdy outdoors kind of features. So I wonder what it's been like for you to step into a workshop environment, which, I don't know if this is true for you, so this is my question. I know some men specifically who have come into the workshops find it to be a very, very different, sometimes challenging environment. I wonder if any of that is...
I do remember being challenged in the beginning by some of the things I encountered in the workshop. But I think that, like a lot of men, maybe of my type, I also was very sensitive and very easily hurt. And part of my process in the 5 years I've spent studying with you guys has been to settle that down a little bit and notice when strong feelings come up that they are not a necessary part of the situation. They are a way I, grew up, or a way I've learned to be in the face of anything that triggers me or causes conflict. And as I settle that down and pay more attention to the other person without letting my own feelings get to be, like a wildfire and get sort of run away, I become more and more curious about the other person and what I can do for them. The greatest gift of your work for me has been the way in which I'm learning to communicate with other people. And I'm not just talking about intimate partners. I'm talking about my now adult children. I have children in their early 20s. I'm talking about people I have to deal with in my work. The greatest gift has been to learn how to talk to people in a way that doesn't immediately cause resistance
Yeah.
and work opposite to what I want.
Yeah.
So that has been a great gift that you've given me.
Yeah. I'm glad to hear that. And I wonder if you're willing to share that. You gave an example the other day of a conversation you'd had over the phone with your son. That I wonder if you're willing to share a little bit about that, because that was I thought that was a really beautiful example of what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, I should say that both my children and I think, have a close relationship, and as kids grow up, especially if they're close to their parents, the power of the parent in their lives remains kind of paramount. And so when they're having a tough experience or a difficult time, it's not uncommon for my kids to lash out at me because they think somehow, or they feel somehow, that I must be responsible for the tough time they're having.
Yeah.
Or at least they need to vent to somebody.
Uh-huh.
And I think before I was with you, I would have defended myself. Hey, that's not fair. I didn't do that. You should take responsibility. Whatever way of deflecting them. And I now understand in this and other situations where there's conflict that it's okay for me to just listen. And help them get through that first layer. And inevitably what comes up after that layer is done is their love for me.
Yeah, that's great. And I personally think that's one of the best gifts we can give to anybody that we connect with.
Yes.
Is the ability to, if you're talking to me,
Yeah.
is that I don't immediately, like that's what I heard you say before.
Yeah.
I don't immediately put my story on what you're telling me.
Yeah.
And I don't immediately interject my own, either defenses or explanations, however reasonable they are, if I could just be with, or like be an active, present witness to whatever it is you're sharing with me, I believe I can give you a present, like give you a gift that allows you to see yourself and hear yourself. And I think I remember you saying something like, by you just being present with your son in this case, that way, that you really just, that he was just left with whatever it was that he had shared with his words.
Yes, if you fight back or defend yourself too avidly, the other person will then fix on whatever they think isn't true about your defense. If you allow them to just have their, whatever their upset is, and just be present with them and stay with them as much as you can, it's the best way to help them. And the funny thing is that, you know, I was, as you say, I was in law enforcement. I was a federal and state park ranger for some 21 years. And through 14 of those years, I actually taught police defensive tactics and arrest and control techniques. And what we were trying to teach people is don't react. Don't let people jack you up.
Right.
Don't let people take control of the situation emotionally by making you emotionally out of control. We taught that and we taught that and taught that. And yet in my personal, intimate life, I hadn't yet learned to settle myself while somebody else was having a difficult experience.
Yeah, and we know that from experience that is really one of the biggest challenges for everybody who's engaged in, you know, intimate relationships, or really in communications with anybody that gets a little bit close to us, is the ability to kind of settle ourselves, to remain calm, to remain calm in the face of emotional intensity.
Yeah, and I understand now that the best way for me to serve another person is not to pour gasoline on that fire. And certainly in a lot of marital or close partner disputes, it's exactly what people do. Somebody says something hurtful, the other person begins to defend, the other person then attacks stronger, and you're off and running. And I think you've said that what you really want isn't what you think you want.
Right.
And so, for example, in a conflict with another person, whether it's my intimate partner or my child or somebody that I have to work with or choose to work with, what I think I want to do when conflict starts is to defend myself against charges that aren't true, to straighten out the record about
Right.
what they think I did. But you know what I really want is to feel good, to feel love for the other person, to have a good time with them.
Yeah.
And the way that I used to handle conflict was exactly the perfect way not to get that.
Right. Yeah. Why do you think that is? You know, I'm still, after teaching all this for many years, I'm still curious about that. Why do you think that is? We're so eager in conversations like that to kind of set the record straight and to make sure you know that I didn't say that. And
Well, I think because you've said that for the most part, you know, other than axe murderers and so on, that people really have good intentions. And the reason they do what they do comes from some kind of positive intention. It may not wind up that way, and it certainly may not look that way to us. But it's true for us too. We come at them with, you know, what we think is right and with good intentions. And when we feel misunderstood, we really feel hurt that our good intentions weren't seen.
yeah.
I was just trying to help you.
Right.
I'm just trying to remind you that that didn't happen, you know, or whatever that is. Right?
Yeah. It's like I'm really trying to say, no, really, I'm a good person with a
Yeah.
good heart.
Right.
I was trying to do something
And
good.
I think that, you know, what I've come to understand is the impact of fear in one's life and emotional hurt or emotional sensitivity.
Say more about that. How do you mean
Well,
that
I
the
think
impact of
if you
fear?
look at what triggers situations that don't go well with people, we get our feelings hurt, and we are trying to sort of rescue ourselves by straightening the record out. I didn't do that. I never said that. I didn't mean that, you know, so that we can redeem ourselves in someone else's judgment. And we really just don't want to hurt. We don't want our hearts to hurt. Or we're afraid. We're afraid that we'll lose the other person's love. We're afraid that we already have lost their love. These are the things that incite us that get us to do things that sometimes aren't productive.
Yeah, where we end up producing the opposite, in our experience, the exact opposite of what we're desiring, actually.
Yeah. What do you say?
That's a quote from Sonica, actually. Every overdetermined effort produces its opposite result.
And Sonica's not here with us right now, but boy, what an amazing human being she is, and how lucky I've been to work with both of you.
Yeah. What's kept you? Because you've been involved and coming back to our workshops at different times for quite
5 years.
Quite a period. Yeah, over 5 years now. What keeps you coming back?
Well, the funny thing is, looking back on it, LoveWorks was the information that I wish I'd had when I was 20. I wish I'd had it when I was 25.
I'm raising my hand to say me too.
I wish I'd had it when I was 30 and 35 and 40. And, I think you've collected practical information on relationship that everybody can use. And I'm coming back because I want to practice. And practice really is an important part of this. I think what you do isn't just a bunch of talking. Your students work in practical exercises, both with their intimate partners sometimes, but also single people. There's a lot of single people in your workshops, and they get to work with a group of other individuals and practice these things. And it's really like any other skill that you can't just talk about carpentry.
Yeah, right.
Sooner or later you got to get out there with a saw and a hammer and a screw and a drill and actually use the tools to get the feel for them.
Yeah, that's very much what we're attempting to set up. It really is a workshop, just much like the workshop in our garage.
And it's so important to actually do these things, to model these things and try these things with other people.
Yeah.
And I found that you're really sensitive you don't involve people in things that they find embarrassing or too, you're really gentle with people. You're not pushing them beyond their limits. I think you're very responsible in the way you've handled your students.
Yeah, glad to hear that. Yeah, we always say that at the beginning of our workshops. When we don't put anyone on the spot, and you can say no to everything, and we're not going to come confront you and be in your face about it. We just to the best of our ability, trust that people are adults about the stretches they are willing to share. I'll just say for myself, that was one of the breakthroughs in my own life is when I found out that relationships was like other skills. That it's something you could actually learn particular insights and tools and exercises around, and it's something you can get good at. That honestly, I know it sounds dumb when I say it now, but when I was a young man, that never occurred to me.
No, and there's such a tragedy in that, really.
There really is.
It turns out that dealing with other people is not just about finding the perfect marriage or the perfect relationship or sort of intimate things like that, but it's about the workplace. How do we deal with other people who have themselves strong feelings without causing unnecessary resistance to the very thing that we're trying to do?
Yeah, for real.
And I think they didn't teach us this. There was nothing about this in high school.
Definitely
not.
There
was nothing about this in college or graduate school. And employers sometimes have little workshops, but man, it's not this. And what you've assembled here is the master toolkit for human relationship.
Yeah. What would you say are what are some specific tools or insights that have been really useful to you?
Well, I grew up in this time of postmodernism, and we see postmodernism all around us in the face of in politics, for example, the idea of alternative facts, that there's no longer facts and falsehoods. There's just all kinds of different versions, and they're all equally true. That is an outcome of postmodernism's intuition that there is no ultimate truth, And I just don't believe this. I think that, science gives us certain, truths, and there is, in fact, a difference between truth and falsehood. At the same time, in personal relationship, it's to me through your work that I always see everyone and everything that they're doing through my own narratives and stories about them.
Mm-hmm.
That has been the most important thing for me. And to understand, you can't stop making up stories about people. You can notice that you have them, and notice that what you're seeing or what you're hearing from another person is always filtered through attitudes and perceptions and stories of your own. That's been immensely useful to me.
And have you been able to change the ones that weren't working for you?
Yeah, I've been able to notice that there's a choice. And sometimes when I'm worried about someone, even in my work, for example, sometimes I worry when people don't answer an email for a week.
Right.
What are they thinking? Well, do they not like me? Did I say something wrong? Right? A lot of times they went on vacation. They never saw the email.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it's very healing to just change the story that you're living with so you don't suffer as much. Because until you really know what's going on with people, it's just as likely that something good happened. They won the lottery and they went to, Monte Carlo to gamble,
Right.
as it is that they don't like you and they don't want to answer your email.
Yeah.
So, you can actually intentionally reach in and try a different story that hurts less until you know what the real deal is.
Yeah, that's great. And hey, so I'm also curious, what would you, given that you are someone who says yourself, not too long ago you thought you'd never set foot in a workshop. Now you have and have had a good experience with it. What would you say if there's someone listening who feels similarly? What would you tell them now? That you're on the other side of it and have gotten good use of it.
It's a great question. I always thought of myself as a practical person, and early in life I tried to learn a lot of skills. I worked on my own cars. I carpentered. I always thought of myself as a person who was interested in learning all kinds of skills. And if you look at your life, you see how short you are in this one. It's almost universally true that we have not been given what we needed to get by in the world of conflict and misunderstanding and so on. And life is too short to suffer without skills that are available. And I would say to everybody, avail yourself of this, and your life will move along in the way that you want it to. You will suffer less. And life is too short not to get what you're really wanting.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And I appreciate very much that you said, I wish I'd known this when I was 20 and 25.
Yeah, that's right.
I feel very much the same way myself. I feel fairly certain that the relationships I had, whether they lasted or not, for a short time or a longer time, they would have had a very different flavor. Then they would have ended differently, even the ones I chose to end.
And to be fair to ourselves, both you and I think a person has to get to a position where you realize that you're short on something.
Yeah.
Meaning that maybe at 20, I didn't come to workshops of any kind because I didn't think I needed one.
Yeah.
And at some point in life, you get desperate enough with the way things are going. You just go, there's got to be something better than this. Mm-hmm. And I think that is the place that, spiritual seeking and this kind of thing come from, is there's got to be something better than this.
Yeah.
And I certainly had reached that point when I came to you, and I will try to do this work for the rest of my life.
Thank you. I appreciate you're someone who would do that, even despite initial skepticism. And I appreciate your support for us and the workshop and for everybody listening. So to hear some of your experience. So thank you very much for taking your time here. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we begin to wrap up here?
Life is short. It's too short to suffer when there are tools available to alleviate that suffering.
Thank you. I think those are good words to end with. Thanks for joining us, everybody. That was Jordan Fisher-Smith, and I hope that was useful for you. It was for me, so thank you very much, Jordan. Love you and appreciate your time, so thanks for being with us today.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
You have been listening to the Dare to Love podcast with your hosts, Sonica Tinker and Christian Peterson, founders of LoveWorks. And hey, if you found this podcast to be useful, would you go ahead and hit the share button and share this with your friends on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or wherever your favorite hangouts are? Thanks so much for sharing the love. And you can find more about our work at loveworksforyou.com. Thank you.